Hello, everybody, and welcome tonight to the Media Mentoring Project's program on Speaking Your Truth, opinion writing. So glad everyone can be with us this evening. For those who don't know me, I am Olga Peters. I am a freelance journalist, former reporter for The Commons, as well as the host and producer of the podcast and show on BCTV, the Montpelier Happy Hour. Tonight's discussion is sponsored by Brattleboro Savings and Loan and is presented by Vermont Independent Media, who is the publisher of The Commons, an award-winning free weekly newspaper based in Brattleboro, Vermont, and also the sponsor of the Media Mentoring Project. Brattleboro Community Television is our technical sponsor tonight. We want to thank them for helping us out. They will be muting folks' microphone, taking care of cameras, as well as helping with any technical issues that might come up this evening, because it's Zoom and it's the virtual world. We know how those things happen. We have the following speakers tonight. I'm so glad they can be joining us this evening. I'm going to start with introducing Melanie Winters. Melanie, if you wouldn't mind, thank you. Melanie Winters is the news editor news editor Melanie Winters has been a journalist for over 30 years. She has been with the Reformer for more than 10 years, first as night editor and currently as managing news editor. And the 145-year-old Reformer is, along with the Bennington Banner and the Manchester Journal, owned by Vermont News and Media Group, which purchased the papers in 2021. Next up, I want to introduce my former editor and former, well, not classmate, but schoolmate, Jeff Potter. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Olga.
We've known each other a long time. Jeff has almost 40 years of experience in all aspects of publishing, starting with a number of newspapers in Western Massachusetts in the 1980s. He has edited, published, produced, designed, and consulted on a number of publications, everything from Labors of Love, produced in friends' basements, to premiere book designs. In 2008, oh my gosh, like, wow, that's a long time, Jeff. Jeff joined Vermont Independent Media as the first permanent editor of this grassroots newspaper. The Commons took the publication from a monthly to a beloved and highly respected award-winning weekly. He has a degree in math and computer science with a concentration in ancient Greek, which he says was a good idea at the time, and he earned that at Middlebury College. He lives in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts with his wife, Susie, and their two cats, one of whom is named after a typeface, because I don't think there's a typeface in the world Jeff has met that he could not recognize and name. Elayne Clift. Hello, Elayne. Thank you for joining us tonight. Elayne is an award-winning writer and journalist. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Christian Science Monitor, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Salon, and numerous magazine periodicals and anthologies. She is a regular columnist for several New England newspapers and a reviewer of the New York Journal of Books. The author of 2 memoirs, 2 books of poetry, 3 short story collections, a travel memoir, and 3 edited anthologies. Her poem, Listen and My Heart is Breaking. Sorry, Elayne. I Listen and My Heart is Breaking was set to music and performed by the world-renowned a cappella group, Sweet Honey in the Rock. And she offers writing workshops at various venues, ranging from conferences and arts programs to destination locations as well. Hey, hello, McLean Gander. Glad you can join us tonight. Mac Gander is an investigative journalist with the Commons, and he is also a professor at Landmark College. He grew up in Manhattan and spent summers in Guilford, which is how he, I guess, came to love this place. He has studied poetry at Harvard and Boston University, where he was the Hoyt Fellow in Creative Writing in 1981. He practiced journalism at Newsweek International in Manhattan and for The Nation in Manila during the 1980s before moving to Vermont and going into education. In addition to working at Landmark, he joined the VIM board in 2019 and currently serves as acting secretary in addition to his role as reporter and writer. He lives in Brattleboro, Vermont with his wife, Chantalee Gander. So that is our panel tonight. So glad you can all be here. We're going to start speaking with some of the editors, and then we will hear from Elayne and Mac. So I would love to dive in and give a quick check in the chat. If anyone has any questions throughout the evening, feel free to drop them in the chat, and during question and answer time, we will try to pull from there and answer some questions. So, ready, Jeff and Melanie. So I'd love to start with you, Melanie. Describe for us the process of putting together the op-ed section of the Reformer. What are some of the things you consider when you're going through all your letters to the editor or your op-eds?
Okay, well, there's 4 main elements to our opinion page, provided if we have just one opinion page. I would love it if we had more, and then we could have more. But the 4 main elements are, we have an editorial. If we have time, we'll write one ourselves. Sometimes we'll take one from the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Wall Street Journal, some of the biggies. We also have letters to the editor, and then an op-ed or a commentary, usually from somebody in the area, about a prominent issue that people are discussing, whether it's statewide or local. It's a lot of it. The difference between letters and commentaries or op-eds, some of it has to do with length. Letters are generally shorter and more to the point. Commentaries and op-eds, they're usually a little bit longer, more in-depth, and they usually come from people who have some expertise on the topic, or from a local or a state official who is working in that area or something like that, or an elected official who has a little bit of authority to speak, and we allow them a little bit extra space to do that.
Mm-hmm. And you may have said this, and I'm sorry if I didn't hear it. Do you have a prescribed word count? So if someone's sending in a letter to the editor.
Yeah, actually, good follow-up question. I didn't mention that. For letters to the editor, we ask people to try and keep it to under 700 words, usually less. For opinions, commentaries, and op-eds, about 1,000, give or take. Less. We don't like people to go over 1,000 words.
Okay.
We've had that happen before, and I've kicked it back to them, and I can't cut anymore. I can't. And I'm like, I'm sorry. We can't guarantee. We could try to get this in, but it may take several days, and they don't want to wait several days because they want to get it in soon. So, it's amazing how when they look back at it, they find some areas to trim back, and some of them. Sometimes people actually thank me and say, that was a good exercise for me.
Nice. And it's nice to hear that that there's kind of a back and forth between, fantastic. Thank you, Melanie. So Jeff, now the Reformer is a daily, and the Commons is a weekly. You have a slightly different structure to the opinion page. It's called the Voices section. So same question, what are some of the things you consider when you're going through submissions to Voices?
Well, there are two different pools from which I select things. Number one is the material that people send in to, and people are always welcome to send it to voices@commonsnews.org. That's our dedicated email address to make sure that goes right into the queue. And every Saturday morning, I sit down and take a look at that and see what we got. The other pool from which I choose is keeping my eyes and ears open to the wide world out there, and to people who make impassioned posts on Facebook, to blog posts. Sadly, that seems to have diluted a little bit in the past decade, but especially when blogs were a thing, I would sit down and perform Google searches on Dummerston blog, Marlboro blog, particularly in the earlier days of the paper when we were less established, and I was, I really had, and also when I was still learning. Well, you never stop learning the community, but I knew very few people in town, so I've got to get, so that was a really good place to begin, because you're going from a position of where you're starting from the position where people are trying to get their voices out there, and maybe you have the transition from a really well written Facebook post to an op-ed is surprisingly easy and effective, and it gives people a very different audience and a little bit of an imprimatur of legitimacy. Which is not to say that, I mean, I'm hearing myself say that, and that's, oh my God, no. I mean, it's just a very different, it's just a very different sort of venue for your writing, and it's probably a little bit more traditional, and it gets you into the hands of more readers. So,
well, it's the town square. I mean, the
exactly.
op-ed pages are the town square.
A town square,
or
I would
town
say,
square.
I would argue that social media is another town square, whether one is better or not, maybe a different forum to have. But so anyway, I do try to get a lot of, I spend a lot of time poking through because I don't want our pages to be exclusively the domain of people who are in positions of authority and power. I really want to empower people who might not have a traditional background in writing, and really give and who have something to say worth saying. So you've got this sprawling array of voices from people who maybe have some power and authority who shouldn't, but are in the public arena, and readers really should know what they're reading. Should have there's a legitimate need for people to to know what they're thinking and how they're thinking, and then also people that I just find these gems all the time. I get so excited to find new writers especially writers who really just aren't themselves seeking to get into print, and really shepherding them into that world. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Are there any other, for folks who might be considering submitting something to Voices, anything they should consider around like word length or anything like that?
Well, Melanie's going to wince when I say this, but in all the years I've been doing this, I have never counted words. And at this point, I'm going to be really honest and say I never will. Now, what I'm really looking for is whether what you're writing is as long as it has to be and as short as it can be. That's the sweet spot. And if it's longer than it needs to be, then we will have that conversation that's similar to the one that Melanie was describing. I would love working with writers. I love doing back and forths. I love it when they push back on edits. Maybe not at the moment, but I love that process. That it can be a collaborative process, because it is, after all, somebody else's name on the piece. The last thing I ever want to do is impose my voice or my opinions on something, or misrepresent the gist of what anybody's saying. I try to edit voices minimally. Some people may be surprised at that, but that's at least what I'm trying to do.
Thank you, Jeff. I know I said I was going to wait for chat questions until the end, but one just came up that I think is pertinent to what we're talking about now. John Snyder has asked, said, I understood Melanie to say she had 4 criteria on letters. He only heard one. Can you speak to the other three quickly,
Oh,
please,
no, I'm
Melanie?
sorry. We have 4 elements on our opinion page. That's
Thank
the
you.
editorial, the cartoon, the letters, and the commentary or op-ed.
Great.
In terms of what we look for in letters, I mean, we'll run everything as long as it's clean and not nasty, and isn't dripping with disinformation or accusations, false accusations.
Yep.
Well, thank you for saying that, because that kind of leads me to my next question. What's the difference between opinion writing and reporting, especially around the realm of like fact checking and slander and libel? Again, Melanie, I'd love if you would start.
Okay. Well, a reported story, obviously you're looking to get both sides of the story, comments from both sides. You try to balance how they're presented and try to reduce or eliminate the number of adjectives you use. With opinion writing, you're trying to persuade somebody to a certain point of view. You might throw in the other side just to refute it, basically. But you're definitely trying to persuade somebody to a certain point of view.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I'm sure you have.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the in a perfect world, everything that goes into our voices section, I do try to fact check as much as reasonably possible. If I see a quote, I will put it into Google and see if it returns that quote. And sometimes we'll get some surprises, and that informs kind of where we go from there. I've caught a couple of plagiarists. I've caught a couple of self-plagiarists who never disclosed that they were recycling columns that they wrote for other publications, which it was.
That's a whole other story.
It was fun to watch. It was fun to watch them squirm. But really, I try to give as much rope as possible to contributors, up to and including contributors that may have some unpopular opinions. We don't get a lot of our writers are speaking to you. I mean, this is a very liberal county, and we don't have a lot of representation of right of center voices. But whatever we do, I really try to check and make sure that everything is based in reality, like confirmable reality. Once I followed a letter around a kind of a daisy chain of citations back to the original, and that ended up literally nowhere. Which where I think it had something to do with a controversy about several years ago about refugees in Rutland.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
And it was just some outrageous thing. You just don't. I check those things. I really do.
Well, here's a question for both of you, because I sometimes hear from folks outside the newspaper who will say, well, it's an opinion piece. You don't have to fact check it.
Baloney.
Okay.
It's if you want, and going back to your original question about kind of the line between opinion and reportage, I mean, it really is a spectrum, and the voices section really does accommodate things that are really very much reported journalism that is coming with somebody with an obvious or disclosed conflict of interest or attitude. It doesn't mean it's not journalism, but it does mean that it's not your traditional, that if you're not even trying for objectivity, then it doesn't belong on the news pages. So there is a continuum there.
Have either of you ever received something that crossed over the line into slander or libel?
Oh, I'm sure. I know.
I'm sure I have. I can't think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure.
But it is
Perhaps
something that could
somebody
happen.
mentioning, I can't remember details, but perhaps somebody mentioning some accusation or some incident that happened years ago, and they're kind of twisting it a little bit, and so those go in the circular file.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And what really gets thorny is if you have some shall we say interesting points of view from from original from public meetings where this stuff bubbles up to the surface, Elayne will remember the infamous Rockingham Free Public Library debacle from a few years ago, where you legitimately had library trustees who were making these allegations against their librarian, and we would report things, or people would write things that were based, that were quoting meetings or whatever. I know at one point or another there were things that I'm saying, should we print this? Can we print this?
Right.
I mean, when the meeting itself is hurtful, you get some let's just say irreconcilable differences when it comes to trying to figure out the best course of action for making sure that people aren't hurt in our pages. And sometimes they will be. I never want that to happen, but sometimes I'll always try to keep a space where people can be honest and forthright, and do so fairly, but without hitting below the belt.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a level of decency that we still try to maintain that has kind of crossed the line over on social media.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah, I hear you. So we have a few more minutes here. Melanie, any suggestions to folks who are considering either an opinion piece or a letter to the editor? Just any tips, tricks, thoughts that you'd like to share?
I would start with, go by the old standard from composition class. Write an outline. Write an outline to organize your thoughts. These are the central thoughts. Now, how am I going to approve that? What am I going to say to back this up? And what's my initial phrase to hook everybody in? Those are the major elements of writing it. The initial hook, the main points, and then the summation.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
I would wholeheartedly echo all of that. And I would also add right from the heart too. I mean, I think that there's, that you're not trying to spin anybody in a local newspaper letters column, or whether it's a letter or op-ed, whatever you want to call it. You're just, this is a community forum, and you're part of the community, and there's just be yourself, be honest. And what I try to do is try to gently help people be their best selves, and in print, and represent themselves in a way that can't be misconstrued, misunderstood, or where you don't sabotage yourself. Sometimes I won't print a letter because it's not going to be helpful to anybody, least of all the person who's trying to submit it. I've got my most wince-worthy letter story was when we got the wife of somebody who was convicted of a sex crime.
I remember that
in
one.
with a letter from their minor child that denigrated the victim of her father.
That was a messy one. Yes.
But that was also a very easy decision.
Yes, if no one else remembers that letter, it's because it was never printed.
Yeah. So I'm sure we could have a beer and go over all sorts of other stories about all the things that don't print. But I like my and I would bet, Melanie, that you would have the same kind of the same vibe there. Is how do we get to yes? I'm not in this to not print something. I really want to find what's really hiding behind there. And if something isn't printable, we do want to work with people and give them.
You actually met with that family, didn't you? With the wife and the.
Oh yeah.
You ended up meeting with them too, didn't you?
That was difficult.
Yeah. Any last thoughts before I bring on Mac and Elayne?
Can't think of anything.
I would say that we're about to introduce two people who are very important to the Commons, and I appreciate their contributions both to the newspaper and to the general Southern Vermont writing landscape.
Wonderful, thank you. So for everyone in the audience, we're going to hear now from two writers who have published many wonderful pieces in the Commons, Elayne Clift and Mac Gander. So glad you can both be with us today. First question for both of you, and just in case someone came on late, Elayne, would you just wave, and Mac? Thank you. So I would love to hear from both of you, because as I understand it, you have both done journalism as well as opinion writing. And curious for you, what's the difference between both of them, and how do you approach a piece? You know, how do you approach them differently? How about we start with Elayne, please?
Thank you. And thank you, Jeff, for the kind words. I'm giving you a shout out in a few minutes, but I appreciate that. And I really love writing for this paper. It's for the Commons. It's really a wonderful, wonderful model and home to be in. So I'm in a very different space when I'm doing journalism from when I'm doing columns, right? And I'm very mindful that and I could be writing journalism because I pitched a story somewhere or because an editor has assigned a story to me. So I'm very conscious of what does the editor want, and some editors are very clear about how they want you to approach the story, and some just say, write about this,
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if they know you, it's comfortable and you kind of get where we're coming from and each of us is coming from. But I'm very conscious of journalistic ethics and of the importance of the fair and balanced idea and being very sure that I've done my homework in terms of researching the topic and I do, look for people who I can quote in order to make clear what we're talking about in a journalistic piece. When I'm doing an op-ed, it's funny. People often ask me when I'm talking about writing, they ask me if I journal, if I journal regularly. And I don't journal in the sense that they're asking me. I don't keep a journal, but I'm journaling all the time because the op-eds are how I process everything that I'm concerned about or that I'm enraged about or that I'm happy about, So my whole mindset is different and they both are pleasurable. It's really great to do a story. I do some art writing, for example, and it's great to do a story about people's work or people's position on something or a key critical issue. But it's also wonderful to have a place where I can have a voice, that speaks to my take on things. And so I think what they both share is that I do research. I do a lot of research for both because in an op-ed, I want to be credible and have back up some of the argument I'm making. And I also want to be very careful about attribution. And this is where I'm going to do the shout out to Jeff because he has covered my back a few times when I have slipped up on that. And
I see Mac nodding too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's wonderful the way he does it and that he does it and he does it so well. And I guess what I'm really saying is that no matter how much you've written or how experienced you are, none of us is perfect. We every time we sit down to write a piece, we're sitting down as a beginner on that particular topic.
Yeah.
So, but I love the fact that, I can share my point of view and have a bit of a rant without being rude or off-putting. Although I do get a lot of hate mail, but so I really enjoy both sort of writing venues and I'm just so happy to be able to. And the other thing is I get a lot of lovely feedback from people who thank me for what I'm writing and who say that I've given voice to what they wanted to say. So I can't do that in journalism, but I can do it in. So they're both very satisfying kind of tasks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elayne. Mac, how about for you? How do both of these show up?
Well, first I want to just say what an honor it is to be on this panel with you, Elayne, and I really appreciate your work a lot. Well, Jeff and Melanie, you guys do great work, and Jeff, you're my favorite editor ever. Jeff, you said something about the spectrum of what can appear in voices, and I've done everything from covering drive-by shootings in Brattleboro to writing about, personal experiences in my life, so for me, it's a little bit more of a spectrum. And I think of the idea of narrative and that the idea of accuracy in the narrative is always really important. And sometimes you're investigating like a real personal narrative. You want to be accurate to your own experience. And I've written a couple pieces like that. I had that Me Too plus, my own Me Too story from a tale of sexual abuse from my adolescence, and a story about a time that my wife and I were, really racistly attacked on a turnaround at Exit 3. And those were personal stories. And then I think about something, I put a lot of time into researching the connection between Trump and, and Russia, right? And I've been on that, that story I've been following for a really long time. And that was really research-based. I didn't call anybody up. And then for a piece, like I did one on Arkham, the late lamented dive bar in Brattleboro, that was pretty reported. Like, it was still an opinion voices piece. So I guess I don't draw those distinctions so strongly, except to have a very clear sense of what my intention is, and then what kind of research and reporting I need to do to execute it. Like what's my audience, who's my purpose, how long should it be? So it feels like it's always kind of reporting. And then at the same time, I don't believe in the idea of objectivity exactly. That's why you have editors. Ultimately, I'm going to be shaping things in a certain way. My most recent piece, I think, Jeff, you cut out like the first 4 paragraphs of it. And I was like, wow, that was really smart. I put like an hour or 2 in those paragraphs, but you made it much better by doing that. I think it's really important to think about, why am I writing something? Like, why do I want to do something? I write all the time, and I write across, I'm a poet and I'm a short fiction writer. I teach creative nonfiction. I teach narrative nonfiction. I teach journalism. I've done journalism since I was in my 20s, on and off. And it's kind of like figuring out where, what's this story about? And with some of the folks, and I'm going to give a shout out to people like Kevin and Nancy, who are here from the, our Thursday night group, that, you're making decisions about like what's the best way, what's the story, what's the best way to tell it. And sometimes it is really personal. I guess the one thing I eschew is that I try not to have opinions. Like, I'm really not interested in my own opinion. Like, who am I? I'm just some guy. What I want to do is create frameworks within which within which opinions can be framed and then discussed. And I often try to end stories with questions rather than answers. I'm not interested in giving people answers. And I can't promise that I always do that. Sometimes I feel like with racism, I'm very passionate about it.
And I'm going to jump in there, Mac. How do you reconcile, because you said earlier that you don't believe in objectivity, and yet you don't believe in opinions. I think some people would argue those are, one and the same. If there's no objectivity, it's all opinions.
Well, what I would say is it's how, I think, going back to what Melanie was saying about having an outline, you're organizing a story, you're creating a narrative, and you're telling a story. At Newsweek, we always used to say, journalism's the first draft of history. You do your best, right? And I think that the organization of a piece that I write is subjective because I'm writing it. But I try to be as fact-based, research-based, reporting-based as possible. Even when I do, voices pieces, the favorite columns, some of my favorite columns have been reporters' notebooks that, Jeff, bless your soul, that you let me write after having done these special focus projects, and at the end I get to use like my experience of reporting. I've done 30 interviews, and now I get to write 1,200 words about that, kind of what my take is. At the Times they call it news analysis. And I think a lot of what I do is kind of like in that realm, rather than the sort of sense of like I'm against what's happening with rescue, or I'm for what's happening with rescue. Like I just don't, I'm not there. I don't feel like my opinion matters. What I want to do is try to present information and,
Mhm.
frankly, in a way that's readable. I mean, you really want people to just like what you wrote, right? I mean, it's like, this is a good story. So it's funny. I'm in New York right now, hanging out with like these great journalists, and and that's all they really wanted to do, is to like do, stories that people
Mhm.
want to read. But I think, and when I say opinion, I guess what I'm really saying is that I don't think that my take on a local issue matters. I
Mhm.
think what's more important is how to frame the different takes that people have on a local issue in a way that lets someone else make up their own mind. I'm not telling anybody
Okay.
what to think, if that makes
Thank
sense.
you. Thank you. That's really great, Mac. So bouncing back to you, Elayne,
Mhm.
what is your process for structuring an opinion piece? We heard Melanie say earlier in this conversation about putting together an outline. What's your process? How do you take all these ideas and all this information and make it a cohesive piece?
So I get a lot of my ideas. I kind of know what I want to write about, and I'm not always sure how I'm going to approach the topic. But I get a lot of my ideas in my head when I'm walking and when I'm driving. And I don't stop the car to make notes, but I do always have a notebook with me, and like by my bed and everything, because you never get that phrase or that idea back the same way.
Mhm.
So I usually start by knowing that there's something that's a burning issue for me and I need to write about it. And sometimes I have a very clear sense of how I want to start and where I'm going to go with it, and sometimes I don't. So if I want to do something and I can't quite figure it out, I go for a walk or I drive. But I also jot down notes about what are the key things that I want to say and put in there. And it's sort of like I said about journaling. I mean, Joan Didion once said, "How do I know what I think until I see what I wrote?"
Right.
So,
Right.
so that's kind of, but I do, well, actually, in a way, I approach it almost like writing a journalism story, because I think about, what are the few things, what do I want to write about? What's the theme? What's the important? What's the so what question I want to answer, or the action step I want people to take? And so I think about it logically in my head, and I actually develop the piece as I write. I'm not somebody who just sort of throws it all on the page and goes back and does the revisions and draft that way. I tend to edit myself by the paragraph, sometimes by the sentence.
Interesting. Okay.
So when I get to the end, I'm pretty sure that I know where I'm going, and then at the revision, I'm very clear about where I'm going. Well, another thing I like to do is I like the idea of unity in opinion pieces. So readers will probably notice that I very often am able to go back to the lead in the very end of the piece, so that it's a unified whole.
Yeah.
And I'm very conscious of word. A lot of stuff of what I want to say right here to answer you is that I'm going to refer back to what people have said. I mean, you have to be conscious of word count. I'm very, very big on word choice, which is a good way to be conscious of word count. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was go back and take out every single unnecessary word, and do that over and over till you cannot take out another word. So that's very helpful with word count, but it's also really helpful with clarity and with cogent thinking and expression. And it's made me a much better writer to do that. So I think it's important. I always have defined the issue that I want to address, and I've always known why I feel it needs to be addressed and what I need to say about it. I also know that I probably only have space for maybe 3 main points, and that I have to transition them. And that's all the stuff I work at as I go through a piece. I don't work from an outline, but sometimes I work from notes. So I want to know, what is this I'm writing about? What's the how am I going to answer the so what question or the action question? And to be very conscious of the transitions. And it could range anything from a national news story to a local issue to a political issue. I have certain areas I write about mostly, which is health and women and social justice stuff. Is it timed? And I'm very conscious of what Melanie touched on. A few of the things I wanted to say. One is what is the hook? What is the lead? I mean, you have to promise something and deliver it, and you have to is it going to be a question, a quote, an anecdote? What is the tone I want? Do I want to be sardonic? Do I want to be a little humorous? Do I want to be absolutely straight on? Do I want to be poignant? And I know I just have a sense of that even when I sit down to write. I also, as I said, do the research so that I can. I try to convey my own credentials to do that piece when it's relevant, and I also look for expert opinion that will support my point of view, so that it strengthens my own argument. I also mentioned about paraphrasing and direct quotes and so forth. I pay close attention to the submission guidelines, and I just try to write a piece that ends up being really cogent and pithy and important and not offensive, but strong-willed if it's an op-ed. And I've gotten better and better at that as I've gone through the years. And all I can say is, wait till you see what's coming from me about SCOTUS.
Cannot wait. Mac, same question to you. How do you take all that's floating in the ether and cram it in, that 1 million pound bag of ideas in that 3-ounce newspaper page?
I mean, I'm thinking, because I've done both kinds of work for Jeff, and I've done probably in certain ways more reporting than opinion pieces. And when you're doing that, that's just like all hands on deck, 30, Olga, it's like you're interviewing everybody that you can, trying to figure out what your through line is. I think with opinion pieces, I really look for whether I have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
I have opinions about, the Ukraine and SCOTUS and, abortion. And I have opinions about all of those things, but they're not areas within which I'm expert. And other people are more so than I am. And there are lots of places you can read stuff about that. When, in terms of my process, I tend to start thinking of a story in my head for a while, maybe make a few notes. And then at a certain point, I'll feel like I have a sense of the shape of it, and I'll start writing. And it usually takes me about 20 drafts to get to the point where I can send it to Jeff, and then that's another,
Then a new phase begins.
Iteration, right. I was thinking about, I did this piece when they shut the 7-Eleven down across the street from where I was living on Western Avenue at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was just really angry. How could you shut this down? This is where I got my milk and, my eggs and stuff like that, because I could walk across the street. And so I started researching it, and I called up the president of 7-Eleven. I called the corporate headquarters, tried to get something from him. I called up the last guy that had run it as an independent contractor, as opposed to the, what they did was kind of make it a company thing before they shut it down. And I learned a lot about 7-Eleven, labor issues with 7-Eleven, a whole lot of stuff. And so the story started with me just being really, really angry that I couldn't pick up milk without getting in a car, and then, it turned into this other thing, which was, in a way, not the most important story ever written, but I think really touched on the way that corporate America wrecks small towns, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a real issue, and I tried to get at that. And it was a reported piece. So it really varies. With opinion, with voices pieces, because I'm going to use a range for that, because I've done personal essays, I've done reporters' notebooks, I've done viewpoints. There's a whole kind of range of stuff. It starts with me thinking I have something not to say necessarily, not necessarily an opinion, but I have an insight into the questions that are involved, and that I can draw those out in a piece that's somewhere between 1,200 and 3,000 words or whatever, and that's where for me that I really don't like to do voices pieces if I'm not reporting and researching them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever, Jeff, you might correct me, but I don't think I've ever written a piece where I just said, this is what I think.
Right. Interesting. Well, I appreciate both of your responses, because just for the sake of the audience, when I was working at the Commons, I did at times do reporters' notebooks, but I never really wrote for the voices section. And but I do write fiction and screenplays, and it's so interesting for me to hear you talk about process, because for me, journalism is much more like building blocks. how does this piece, and then because this piece is here, that creates this ripple effect and this ripple effect and this ripple effect. So it's really like Legos, where fiction is so different for me. It's such a different process. It's a much more like spinning water kind of emotional process. So thank you for, just even as a fellow writer, I just appreciate hearing what you have to say. So can you give us any examples of both the challenges, but also as well as the benefits of sharing our thoughts and our beliefs and our concerns with our community through something like an op-ed piece? How about we start with Elayne?
Well, I think the challenge is always, how am I going to approach this thing that's driving me nuts? And,
Right.
and also the challenge of things like structure and tone and even point of view or who can I go, where can I, what do I need to research and who do I need to try to be in touch with if I want to quote somebody, and all of those like sort of logistical, mechanical challenges of writing a good piece. But I think that, it's a real catharsis for me and for someone like me who does have strong opinions, to be able to put together a piece that expresses that in a way that's not only satisfying to me, but it legitimates and validates other people's feelings. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the reward. And the reward also is the feedback that I get, which counteracts the negative feedback that I get. So it makes me feel that, honest to God, I really feel like my life is meaningful because I do these op-ed pieces. I don't think it's necessarily meaningful because I do journalism. It's, journalism's good. It's necessary. I like to do it if it's a topic I want to work on. But I feel privileged to be able to do point of view pieces, or op-eds or and then to have so many people that, I teach a lot of writing, and this is writing. Being a full-time writer is the third iteration of my professional life. I started out in national and international work around women's health and health communication and maternal child health that I felt very deeply about. And then I had an academic career for several years where I taught based on that, and my graduate degree is in health communications, and so I taught. And I love teaching. I love teaching motivated or adult students, and so and I've taught internationally, so I've been able to mentor people that way, but also to teach them better writing. I had a Burmese student who, when I taught in Thailand, who came from a very poor rural village. I don't know how he even got through elementary school, but somehow he got to our college. And I was part of a group of us who saw in him his potential and helped him to get to a better college. And ultimately, long story short, he got a Fulbright and he was at Tufts University. And when I saw him here, he said to me, I said, I will never forget you because you taught me how to think clearly and how to write well. And that changed my life. And he's now a very senior person in Burma with one of the international UN organizations. So, there can be nothing more rewarding than teaching or writing in ways that help other people, that change other people's life, that mentor them at the same time that I'm getting a real big ego feed as well. So I just feel lucky and I feel privileged to do it. And I love working with editors like Jeff and readers, and you just have to take the hard stuff when it comes because it's usually not very legitimate.
Thank you, Elayne. Mac, how about for you, the benefits and the challenges?
Well, I would say if we're talking about opinion pieces, I think that the challenges mainly have to do with whether I have something legitimately to say. Mm-hmm. If I do, then it's just, like Lawrence Durrell said, writing's hard work. You just start a blank piece of paper till little drops of blood appear on your forehead, and that's just true. But, if you've been doing it all your life, but knowing that I have something meaningful to say, and Jeff knows, I've had some false starts on voices pieces that I thought might work out and that just didn't. They weren't, I didn't have enough of a take on them and so on. I find my reporting work in Brattleboro to be much more difficult because of the emotional dimensions of it, and the kinds of stories that I do. You wind up talking to people who are in extraordinary pain, or about social issues that are extraordinarily complex. that no one has answers to. And I mean, with that, at least it's nice you don't have to answer. It's not your job to figure out what to do about them because you're a reporter. But I do say to my students, reporters only cry when they're by themselves, the rest of the time. And, it's like you take these stories in, and there's a certain element of pain eating involved with reporting, which I don't face with opinion pieces. I think, for me, the benefit, I always love it when people have liked stuff I did, but I try really hard not to have my work connected to my ego. If that makes sense, like I'm not looking for, I'm trying to do my best job. If Jeff likes it, then I'm good. Best editor I've ever had. If nobody else likes it, and we've gotten, I've gotten in trouble for pieces. When we were covering the drug traffic in the first iteration a few years before COVID, we got a lot of heat about how much time we were putting into it, from certain people who wanted, other stuff and that's, I don't care. It's like, I'm too old to be canceled, if that makes sense. So positive is great. I love it when somebody says, I really like that piece. That's fun. I like that. If they say I really hated that piece, it's kind of fun too. It's like, okay, you responded to it. So, I find the opinion stuff is really more a matter of just being clear you have something to say, and that's hard. That can be hard, because we could all, if you're in a cocktail party, we could all be talking about anything right now and have things to say. But like, what's worth me putting in? What's worth Jeff putting in the paper that I have to say? And figuring that out, I think, is really challenging because I don't write a lot. I thought about like what it would be to be a regular columnist. And one of the things that happens often when you look at the history of regular columnists is a lot of them get kind of tired after a while. They're kind of mailing it in. Like 1 out of 3 columns is really great, but like a couple others are kind of like, what was in the new? I'm thinking about people like Maureen Dowd and Dale Collins, or folks that I like a lot. But sometimes you think, come on, what's that about today? Knowing that something I have to say is important enough for other people to read it is probably my deepest challenge. And after that, the benefit is just to be done with it so that,
So the next thing comes along.
Right, exactly.
Make room for the next thing. I don't know about either you, Mac, or you, Elayne, but when you put together a piece, I'll just speak for myself here. When I was still writing journalism for the Commons, or even when I do my weekly podcast, I hope whatever I'm doing, it helps someone, makes a difference, makes someone think. But I understand fully that once that piece leaves my hands, it is out of my control. And I have gotten very comfortable with that over many years. I still know some friends who are not. How about for you? Like when your pieces leave your hands, are you just like fly babies and be free, or are there still some hopes attached to the type of impact they may have?
I'll start. I archive everything, and I keep it for a really long time, unless it's definitely never going to come back into my mind or currency or anything. But I often do go back to older pieces, and I am able to use them to expand a new thing. And often the same issues come up again, and it's time to remind people about things. And I also use some of my work as teaching tools when I'm teaching. So I do save a lot, and I do go back to them and I make them better, or I may, use them in some other way. I might even use them towards a fiction piece I'm writing, So I never entirely let them go unless they're just not something I need to cling to anymore. And I just, I'm pretty prolific, and I do send out at least 2 columns a month. I've done that for a long time. So, I don't remain in any way emotionally attached to them necessarily. And I don't save them for reasons of ego, and I don't use them for teaching for reasons of ego, but just because I think that they're relevant and they're instructional. And also, when I'm doing writing workshops, I do them mainly now with older adults and elders. I like sharing my work with them because these are very intimate workshops, and I don't want to be the teacher who's like just sort of there. I'm part of that group. And I think that, I want to participate, and I think I should. Vivian Gornick wrote a book called The Situation and the Story, and it's a subtitle, The Art of Personal Narrative, I think it is. It's a very slim book. But she makes the case for the narrator needing to be present. And a lot of times people who are writing opinion pieces, they feel somehow that they shouldn't be in there. And she makes a really strong case for them being very present, because the reader has to know, why are you writing about this? Why do you feel so passionately about this? And then it reinforces their own thinking, or it clarifies it, or it generates a different energy for them. So that's a very valuable little writer's book. And I'm very conscious of being present when it's necessary or appropriate in the pieces that I write. Not, again, like out of egotism, but because I think it maybe adds some level of feeling or depth to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Elayne. How about you, Mac?
Can you repeat the question, Olga?
I'm trying to think of how to rephrase it. When you put something out in the world,
Mm-hmm.
You may have hopes and dreams for it,
Mm-hmm.
or you could just let it go.
Right.
And I'm wondering for you, once something leaves your desk and it's in the paper, what's your relationship to it?
Yeah. Well, I would say with my reporting, the reporting I've done that Jeff has allowed me to do, and that I was doing with Shanta, and now that I do with my students, that I wanted to have an impact. I mean, it's good. Last summer, I spent the whole summer with 2 other students putting together the special focus package on COVID versus opioid addiction, that ran on September 15th. And, you sort of hope if you put 150 hours into something that, someone's going to read it and, pay attention, right? And that was a really good package. I'm really proud of it, in part because the students did such a good job on that too. I would say for, other stuff, these are newspapers. It's like,
They line bird cages at the end of the week.
Exactly, build a fire, and in that sense, obviously, I put time in, so I want someone else to be impacted by it. And I certainly use some of my work in my classes, because I do teach a couple levels of journalism and a narrative nonfiction course. So that's, part of and I've had a lot of journalism interns. So you want to use those things as a way to explain your own process and so on. But I think it's a mistake for journalists to think that they have a lasting. It's the first draft of history. You're moving the ball down the road. It's sort of like, it's very rare for someone to write a piece that catalyzes. It happens, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be the one that does that. It's not going to be me. It's going to be somebody better than me. So yeah, that's what I would say. I think that it just matters. We have to do this. It's journalism. There's nothing more important than a free press to democracy. Yeah. Literally. Literally nothing. Freedom of speech and free press. And we see that everywhere in the world right now. So in that sense, I'm just glad that I do it.
It is an honor. Yes, I agree. We have just a couple minutes before I want to turn it over to question and answer time. So we can, and I've seen an interesting conversation happening in the chat too that we might want to bring forward. But before we turn to question and answer, any last thoughts, Elayne or Mac?
I'm just going to close. I was just putting my website in the chat. I'll go back and do that after. I would just say that I think, first of all, that we all have story. We all have story. All cultures have story. We all want it and we need it. And I think that it's important, however we present our stories. It could be through poetry, through an op-ed, through a short fiction, through memoir. I just think it's important, and I think it's important to recognize that our words are our monuments and that our testimonies matter, our voices matter. And so again, I feel very privileged to be in that milieu, in that environment in which people understand that our stories, our words, our testimonies, our experiences really matter.
Thank you. Mac?
I would agree with you completely, Elayne, and not minimizing it by saying that it's also ephemeral. But life is ephemeral. And that it's, I mean, yeah, I mean, journalism and writing are the most, important bearers of culture and political thought that we have in certain ways. I mean, there are other ways, family communication and so on, but no, it just really matters. I mean, it matters all the time. One instance may not matter so much, but yeah, just doing it really matters. Really matters.
Thank you, Mac. Elayne Clift, Mac Gander, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences with us tonight. I want to turn it over to see if there's any questions from our audience. And one way we can do that is, you can use the raise hand function on your computer, or you can put something in the chat. While folks are kind of thinking of their questions, I'm going to quickly turn to the chat. And Elayne also put her website, Elayne-Clift.com. So if you would like to learn more about Elayne, I would recommend heading over there. So I'm going to quickly summarize what I'm seeing in the chat. There was Gino asked a question about what do folks in the newspaper world have to say about opinion pieces that might be a little tongue-in-cheek? Gino really loves sarcasm in their writing, but worries about maybe offending people, and referred to, I believe it was Bella Gore's piece in the Reformer about the Ukraine. I don't remember how long ago that was. And so I hope that was a good summation, Gino. And if like Jeff and Melanie would love to respond to that, I think we'd love to hear your perspective about, tongue in cheek and tone, and how do we make things work in a op-ed.
Yeah, that Mr. Bellagore's column created quite a stir. And if you don't know Paul, I could understand how you would be confused about where he's coming from. If you know Paul, you know that he's kind of a stereotypical Eastern European with a very blunt character, and doesn't get caught up in sentimentalities. He has an idea, he expresses it. That particular piece is not meant to be tongue-in-cheek, not meant to be sarcastic. It was meant purely as an analytical piece. He was not advocating for war, as a lot of people kind of interpreted it that way. He really was just trying to be analytical about what this meant, what this would mean for the United States. But going back to Gino's question, and that is the difficulty in a tongue-in-cheek piece is, if the person, if the reader doesn't really know you as well, they might not understand your style. Perhaps if you have like a regular column where you have that regular tongue-in-cheek style, they will grow to appreciate it. But sometimes if it comes out of the clear blue like that, people may have to think about it for a minute. But it can be done. It can be done. It can be done very well. But it's an art, I would say.
Jeff.
I would just add to that part of what we do as editors is try to make sure that something isn't so subtle that it would be completely misread. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that we are always 100% successful at guessing how people are going to interpret tone, mm-hmm. There are other nuances to contributions, but the tongue-in-cheek thing is it's got to be pretty darn tongue-in-cheek for tongue-in-cheek to work in.
I remember very early working with Jeff when the Commons was still a monthly. Gemma, you put a great comment in the chat, and I'll get to it in a second. But I don't even remember what we were writing about. But you said, "Oh, this seems very Keystone Cops, and I don't quite understand what this town is doing. So this sounds like a lot of fun. Go Keystone Cop it like crazy." So that's what I wrote. I wrote a Keystone Cop version of this piece. And when Jeff sat down to read it, he's like, 1, thank you for doing exactly what I asked for. 2, let's not do it that way.
Yeah, I was completely wrong. And what came back was something that wasn't so much funny as it was hurtful and
Right.
and not hurtful, but just
Oh,
diminishing.
exactly. Exactly.
and
My
I-
intention
and-
had not been to be hurtful, but once it was out on paper and,
Yeah,
and in big print,
I
like,
couldn't fault you for anything that you did. It was I just had, I gave you the best advice I could to make an interesting. And this is, let's just be clear. This was straight reporting. This wasn't op-ed,
right.
but it was, and maybe that was it. It would have been. It wouldn't have hit as weirdly if it were an op-ed, but it just didn't work. And sometimes you just have to be really critical of and really question when you're taking a chance and doing something that is outside of the normal bounds of serious news writing with a capital N.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Gemma Seymour, really appreciate this question. Gemma wrote that one part of the particular opinion piece we're talking about, or a news analysis piece that Belagor had written, that might be worth scrutiny is, Belagor is the owner of the Reformer and several other papers, and is that privileged position, was that a good use as for a newspaper publisher to use their privilege in that way, I guess is.
That's not uncommon at all.
Okay.
Publishers have opinion pieces all the time. In fact, a lot more than Paul has. He's on the paper for about a year, and I think he's only had 4, maybe 5 opinion pieces in that time. And again, it's really not uncommon for publishers to have, every day or even once a week, have some kind of publisher's corner or publisher's commentary or opinion piece. So that's not unusual.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I heard something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Melanie, that I think that from if I could be really honest for a second, I think that, well, not that I try to be dishonest, but I think that my biggest takeaway from Paul's piece wasn't so much what he said or even how he said it. It's that it just was hard to find that voice and understand what he was trying to say. And I think that a lot of the chatter that emerged from it may be that it's I've always had a policy. Well, I've had a policy since the first newspaper I worked for. It's like, avoid editing a writer who's also your publisher, and I think that that creates its own set of challenges, and I don't know quite what I would have done as his editor, but I think he might have benefited from some more back and forth with it.
Mm-hmm. I see 2 hands up. I think I saw Jessica Lee Smith's hand up first. So why don't we hear from Jessica, please?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you guys so much. I'm really inspired. And to Matt, Mr. Gander, I just want to say I completely understand what you're saying. And I find that, like, it's almost like since the day I was born, I've been offending people for the wrong reasons. Everything that comes out of my mouth is misinterpreted. And of course, I could definitely benefit from planning and outlining and all that stuff. And my mind is like a massive ADD chaos. And, I wish I worked for somebody who could point me in that direction or say, take this out, or, you know what I mean? When I look back at my writing, it's like a big jumbled thing, and I'm seeing it on my small phone, and it's all, I can't even get up, scroll back up to see if I find, and then once I put it out there, you were just saying that was a good point. When it's out there, like, how do you feel about it? And I worry when it's out there, because I feel like in that moment when I was emotionally talking that I'll be misinterpreted again. And it always does happen. It's like, I can't figure out what I'm doing, with everything I'm writing or saying. I know my writing is very, like, it's very sloppy. I'm nothing like you guys, but I'm like a child that's in this, like, by myself. and I can't really even, but I know that I have like regrets about certain things, and I don't know how I'm offending people. But I think it goes in line with what you were saying about Mr. Belcourt, if that's how you say his name, is that, yes, people do those pieces. And like myself too, people do it. And I could say the same thing. Like, well, what about, Howard Stern or so-and-so that does a podcast that's offending everybody, and everybody is an audience, and everybody wants to work with him. Why can't I be that person, even though I'm not as offensive? If somebody takes something I'm saying wrong, not everybody has to like me, but at least I'll be saying it for a good cause or something. But I'm still doing it the wrong way, that I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
So Jessica, I think that's a really great point. And I think what I'm hearing is one of the challenges is you are a lone writer doing this on your own. And so if you don't mind, I'd love to hear from Jeff and Melanie, and even Mac and Elayne, if they have thoughts
Can I just say one more thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
One more thing that I was just going to say was that Mr. Bellicourt, what I was saying about him was that he also came back that he was living internationally. I'm from, a different area. You also have to take into account like that area. I may be offending people. My very energy seems to offend people sometimes, and I don't know how, or it's off-putting. That's the word, off-putting. And I don't know what it is about me that's off-putting, or why everything about me is off-putting. So yes, I would like to hear from you guys, but that's what I'm saying. I don't even know what I'm doing wrong, because like maybe I was raised in a situation where people spoke like that. Maybe I don't have a boundary that I'm supposed to, maybe I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I'm always coming from the heart.
Any suggestions, folks, for the lone writer?
I would say that what I'm hearing is two things that you should try to that seem to be rolled up together I think it would benefit you from trying to pull apart and work on one after the other. One is being offensive aside, or being perceived as whatever people are taking away from it aside. What really makes me think that diagnose something to work on is people not understanding what you're trying to say. And if they don't understand what you're trying to say, then they're getting offended, possibly for the wrong reasons.
It's a good point.
Right. It's confusing. Maybe my writing is confusing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, and again, this is not looking at your writing. This is not even just from knowing what you've just said here. I would suggest maybe slowing down. It sounds like you just take a piece of writing and just try to, whatever you're trying to do with it, cut that in half and try to do something less, just try to do what Elayne suggested, and then just pull out everything that you don't need until you can't pull out any more, and then simplify it, and then test that. See if that lands better or more accurately. And then when you're you're writing a little more stable, then you can see what people are thinking about that, and then you can address whether you're offending, whether people are being offended for reasons that are their problem, or whether they're getting offended for reasons that you don't want them to get offended by.
Thank you, Jeff.
Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, totally.
All right.
Like taking it in doses instead of taking it all on, not taking on the whole mountain at once, like taking it in doses where I, so I can get more of a clear cut, because it may just be like you were saying, which is a great point. A lot of maybe that like confusion is coming from maybe the way that I'm writing it.
Well, let me
jumbled.
And I'm sorry to monopolize here. I just want to say one last thing to Jessica, and then I'll hand the floor over. I'm coming at this as an editor with flaming ADHD. I know how I could tell and you kind of mentioned that in your what you just said. I know how I think, and I know what I have to pull back in order to make my own writing make sense to anybody. And that's just stop and just take it one step at a time and slow down, because if it's just really, if you're firing on all cylinders and trying to, and your head is, head is making hyperlinks the way that our brains are uniquely wired to do, then it's going to be, you're going to be kind of at war with your own head. And that's getting to understand that and work with it. I'm happy, that's something to just take into account as something, as a piece of the puzzle.
Thank you, Jeff. Just in the interest of time, I want to move on. Elayne, I think you had a comment, and then I want to hear from Mac.
Okay, so I think that Jeff's advice is really, really critical and important. And I think one way that that you could be helped with all this, I think what's happening, I sort of picked up on that little ADHD thing too. And I think that it's so easy to be overwhelmed by your own ideas that you get in a frenzy. I mean, one gets in a frenzy. And I think what would really, really help you is to be part of a writers group where you get really good, facilitated by a good writer. And I think that you get feedback. You'll begin to understand why people are, feeling what they're feeling and how you can address that. And also a lot of workshop writing there's a lot of prompted writing, and that's a tremendously good way to learn how to write to a prompt rather than have to deal with this flood of ideas and words that are overwhelming you. Coupled with the constructive criticism and the support that you get from being in a writing group. So, or taking some writing classes. I just think that'd be enormously helpful.
Thank you. That's a great idea too.
The way that Jeff was talking about.
Thank you, Elayne. Mac, I see you've had your hand raised.
Yeah, one quick thing for you, Jessica. I see Mindy here and I see Nancy, and we do this regular Thursday evening thing at 7:30, and you're more than welcome to join. It's really a lot of different levels of skill and so on, and it's a good writers group, and it's fun. And people like Mindy and Nancy are really great helps, and Kevin was here earlier.
On Thursdays?
Great. So Thursdays at 7:30. Yeah, if you I think we might be friends on Facebook, or you can just email me. But what I wanted to do is talk about this earlier thing about Paul's piece, which I take really seriously because I wrote a response in the comments to it. And one, I want to say, Melanie, you're right. I mean, publishers do this all the time. That's just, and the second thing I would say is that it was a little bit long, and you kind of have to know the intersection between global politics and global finance to like really follow the whole darn thing. And I happen to know about that stuff. And I disagreed with this point. And Jeff, actually, this is the piece where, Jeff, you cut out like the first 5 paragraphs where I refuted his intellectual argument, and then went into the whole idea that we should be thinking about the human dimension of Ukraine rather than the potential political and financial benefits to the United States. But he wasn't wrong or right. I disagree with him. I mean, I've studied these things too. I mean, he's a really smart guy. I am too. But part of the point I would make about that is like, he has every right to publish that. There was nothing offensive in it. I mean, you could disagree with it a lot, and I did. Right. I mean, I disagree with it on intellectual terms first, because I don't think his analysis is accurate. I think mine is better. But, that kind of came out of the piece I drafted. I also think it wasn't a good time to be talking about financial benefits from, World War III, right? But at the same time, it's kind of like, so, and I guess my point would be, without being long-winded, is that it's a free marketplace of ideas, right? That's the whole point. Right. I mean, that's why we have journalism, and so, Paul's piece, it gave me a chance to think about, like, well, what do I think about this? And then I wrote a piece, and Jeff published it, and you didn't make it. And I think that was probably smart in kind of terms of local town politics, that I wasn't like Gander going after Bellegarde. And that makes sense, right? I mean, I totally got it. I never even talked to you about it. I said, you cut it. You said to me, to take a look at this. I kind of did it differently than you had in mind. And I looked at it and I said, looks good if you think that's how it should run. There's a lot of intellectual discussion to have about his argument, which may turn out to be absolutely true. I mean, this may, the war in Ukraine may be one of the best things that ever happened to NATO and the United States. It's a terrible thing to say, right? But that's his argument. And it's a very cold financial argument. And it was a very hurtful piece for me because I'm really paying close attention to what's happening in the Ukraine. Like, I watch the clips, I've been watching every day, right? The headlines. So I I would leave it at that idea, which is that we have to be ready for opinions that we violently disagree with, and then disagree with them in civil and thoughtful ways. And I did that, in that piece, which I thought was really, pretty good. It was not so bad. I kind of wish I'd love to have the argument with Paul about the financial implications, because I would love to. I mean, I know this stuff too, right? So it's kind of like it's not like I haven't been around the block for a lot of years.
We'll set up a virtual Zoom coffee between the two of you, and
that would be really fun. I'd love that. Can I read the first 4 paragraphs that Jeff cut?
You can put them in the chat.
Anyway, so I'm going to dial out here, guys. I've been staying with friends. This has really been fun, and I appreciate everybody. If you want to be in a Thursday night workshop with me, it's not a workshop; it's just a writers group. Just email me at mac@commonsnews.org. But otherwise, I'm going to head out. Okay. So nice to see everybody.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Great to see you. So yeah, I think we had planned to end around 8:30. And it's 8:21 now. So I just want to check in. Some great conversations happening in the chat. How about questions? Anyone else have any questions or comments? And I'm sorry, I totally forgot my neighbors were having a drum circle tonight. So if you can hear that, the music sounds beautiful, but wasn't planning on it. It's been the background.
Hello.
Hello, I heard somebody.
Yes, Nye here.
Oh, hi, Nye.
Hi. I've been sitting on a whole bunch of questions, but one of them is, I think it's probably the most quickly answered. Let's see, start my video. Oh. Okay.
There you are. Good to see your face.
I wondered why I didn't have a face. My first quickest question is, what about using an alias, using a pseudonym? I know there's at least one writer in the Reformer who does. I talked to my daughter, who is a veteran journalist, and she said I would never allow that. But I'm wondering, I have some pretty strong feelings about things like abortion and religion and how things work, and I'm afraid of death threats, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid of the kind of back chat that isn't constructive. I don't mind arguing something with somebody, but I don't want to be.
So Melanie,
I'm not sure which columnist you're referring to. You said there was a columnist in the Reformer that used a pseudonym.
Oh, Arlo Mudgett.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's part of his personality. He's got a radio show, and and he's not like a political columnist. It's more of a everyday life kind of columnist. So that's a little bit separate than getting into politics.
Yeah, but it's also an alias, a pseudonym. So
I mean, it's like I said, it's all part of his radio personality and his. I mean, it's like his byline.
He's an actor playing.
He's an actor playing.
Not all at once, please.
But I mean, that's probably the only exception that I'm aware of. Like I said, it's not a political column. When it comes to letters and political columns, we don't allow pseudonyms or anonymous letters because
that's the answer to the question. Not about Arlo, but about
it just leads to too much abuse. I've had people that have tried to get some false stuff in a letter, and it turns out that they're not even who they say they are, and so that ends up blowing up in our face.
But to address the anxiety that I have about violent reactions to something that I might say,
So Jeff put his hand up. I think he has a comment.
I'm gonna first say that our general policy is to say no, we don't do that. I have made waivers to that on occasion when for very unusual circumstances, when the publishing of something on the basis of needing I guess it would have to be a one-on. It would have to be. I would be reticent to publish under a pseudonym under most circumstances, and I think that there would have to be some really unusual, really demonstrable danger for me to really kind of breach that, because as Melanie said, once you kind of cross that Rubicon, it gets really complicated for other people coming in and and it turning into a people really do have to stand behind their opinions.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm always going to listen to, come on in and talk to me. Try, tell me what is what the opinion is, what the threat is, and then we can my answer is probably going to be no, but I have said yes sometimes, because there is something really legitimate, and that in itself might be a news story in some way. So it's worth, I'm always happy to have that conversation. I will say that every time I violate that, that rule, I get, it is not without cost to the paper and to me personally, in terms of people questioning that decision.
Or using that as an example to make an exception for them as well.
Yeah. So
and it opens up the floodgates.
It opens up the floodgates, and it's also not fair to Melanie and the folks at the Reformer too, because people are going to traipse over and say, well, the Commons will do that. I don't want to, and we don't do it often enough that I have, that I think it's a huge compromise, but it certainly could reverberate if we were to be more, if we were to be less stringent as we are.
Okay.
Or I'm saying. But
does that answer your question, Nye?
Yeah, it more than answers it.
Okay.
Do you have you said you had a few other questions?
I do, but it's hard to retrieve.
Now, if you, I know our time is going short. But
I know. Could I?
But let me just say, if you want to email me, Jeff@commonsnews.org. I'm sure Melanie would take offline questions as well. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about anything.
Thank you. I got the piece back, which is that in writing about abortion, I have a very strong poem that I wrote about abortion in 1970. It's appropriate again now. I don't know whether you have to be veranda porch to get published, but
we accept poems all the time.
you do.
Yes.
Didn't know that.
I take a look at it too. I'm a little apprehensive about poetry because, one, I'm not a poet and I don't know poetry, and so that means I'm not as a strong editor of same. And two, there are a lot of bad poets out there, and
I know that.
So, but send it along. Let's talk.
We don't usually get a lot of poetry submissions, but they usually, the ones we do get are usually pretty good. So
I think I saw something in the Reformer years ago saying we have a policy not to accept poetry, so that may have changed.
Oh, that was before I got here.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Nye. Thank you for those really great questions and important questions, especially around pseudonyms. It is 8:30. We have time for one more question if someone would like to ask a question. Oh, did I see a hand? Nope.
Bill, if you don't have anything else, I do want to say that some of the sound, for instance, Matt Gander's sound was so percussive that it hurt.
Okay,
And
good to
I
know.
don't know whether it was volume or whether it was closeness to the mic or what, but I couldn't.
That might be your settings over there. I'm just saying.
Well, it's also my head, but it's, I couldn't really pay attention to what he was saying because it hurt.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. Just in general, folks, we will be having more media mentoring programs coming up. We'll be taking a break and then we'll have more. So in the future, if you're ever in one of these sessions and you're having an issue like that, please put it in the chat because we can
I don't know
address
what that
it
is.
there.
I'm 90 years old and I don't know what the chat is.
Then feel free to just speak up and let us know, because we would have loved to have helped with that.
Yeah, thanks.
So thank you, Nye. Any other? It looks, oh, Jeff.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, Jessica. Yes.
No, I will let Jeff go. I apologize. I didn't want to interrupt.
I was just going to say as a last, my parting shot here is to recognize that among the people in the chat here, the audience is Mindy Haskin Rogers, who wrote the astoundingly, I don't even have the words to describe it. She wrote the piece last year on the legacy of sexual abuse at Brattleboro Union High School. And if ever there was a combination, kind of the nexus of journalism, of opinion, of all the issues that we started to touch on with libel and issue, just putting your neck out, and then having a lasting impact and affecting positive change in the community. I mean, that piece just brought all of these concepts together. And I would be remiss if I didn't just say thank you to Mindy and thank you for being here as well.
Thank you, Mindy. Jessica, quickly.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that in terms of broadcasting here or media, I was looking up online how to be like, do you have to be licensed or whatever to be recognized as media here? And, do you have to get is there an association? Like when I was in acting, it was SAG and AFTRA and Equity, but is there something else with broadcasting? I saw the Broadcasting Association, but it said that you didn't need anything, but I wasn't sure if that was the case because I didn't know how to present myself to my town. Let's say, for example, if I wanted to do some sort of something with the town to be recognized that way.
Indeed, Jeff.
I don't think journalism is the one profession where you can actually just tack a sign to your door and say, hi, I'm a journalist, and you're a journalist. Media is what you make it. And that's both the power and the crazy responsibility that we have. And then arguably one of the reasons that the Commons and Vermont Independent Media created the Media Mentoring Project is to be able to help people who at all levels who want to make media, make it responsibly and effectively.
But you can do it with limited media. Like I have I'm very limited in my media. Obviously I have just a phone. And when I go to meetings and things like that, I'll be told to, they'll almost want me to turn it off or ask me why I'm doing that, as opposed to the other people who have the better cameras and everything like that. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's a topic for another time. Yeah. And I'm happy to talk to you offline about that. Because there's a lot to say about it and we don't have much time. But let's get in touch, Jessica. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Thank you for that, Jeff. So Yes, thank you, Elayne. It was so wonderful to have you here tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining. I think we're all going to turn into pumpkins fairly soon here. So I just want to, before we go, I just want to remind folks that this is our final media mentoring project program for this spring, but the series will begin again, I believe, in the fall. But in the meantime, as Mac mentioned, if you would like to participate in a weekly journalism writing workshop with Mac, you can come once, you can come every week, whatever. It is, it's on Thursdays. And Jeff, how do people get in contact with Mac, or do they need to sign up for that?
I believe you do have to get in contact with Mac, and it's as simple as emailing mac@commonsnews.org. Mac
MAC.
at commonsnews, one word, .org.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, that is it for tonight, everybody. On behalf of Vermont Independent Media, we thank our panelists, and we thank everyone who joined the conversation. And please, everyone, have a wonderful night.
Thank you,
Thank
Olga.
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Great group.